So let me begin by first thanking you all for being here. And I want to thank Sewanee for inviting me. It's been a wonderful experience so far, and I expect it'll continue to be a wonderful experience. That was not a qualification. Let me just set my timer so that I do not run late. Okay, timer, 20 minutes, start. So as I read, I will comment on it. This is an essay that I've been working on while here. It's not an essay I actually wanted to write. I had no desire to write it. My wife told me that she wanted me to. So I said, okay. She read a draft of it and she didn't like it. But at that point, I'd already put in so much work. I thought, I need to try to make some money off this thing. So let me revise this enough until I can sell it. My wife worries a lot. A few weeks after our daughter was born, she told me not to leave the stroller by the front door. A child molester might drive by and see it. I really don't like hearing my wife's worries. They either irritate me or I get worried myself. And when I get worried, I become depressed. And then I end up spending hours on eBay looking at sweaters. When Ziggy was 11 months, Christine said there was something wrong with her. No, there isn't. She doesn't make eye contact. That's because she doesn't like us. I had noticed, of course, that when we sat beside her, she wouldn't look at us. If I held her in the air, she'd peer through me. To me, this felt like she was ignoring us, that she didn't want anything to do with us. You have to stop being crazy, Christine warned. This felt unfair. If I could have changed myself, wouldn't I have done so long ago? One afternoon, Ziggy tumbled off a sofa. Landing on the carpet, she appeared startled. She peered around. The usual dullness around her eyes was gone. She seemed fully aware of the world. Then her face began settling. It was like she was sinking into herself. After a moment or two, the child who had been looking around was gone, and her face was its usual affectless self. This reminded me of Anup. Anup was my older brother. When I was 10 and he was 14, he had an accident in a swimming pool. Before the accident, he was going to enter high school. Because of the accident and spending 3 minutes underwater, he could no longer walk or talk. He couldn't turn over in his sleep. The oxygen deprivation had made him blind. My parents took care of him at home. For almost 30 years, he lay moaning in a hospital bed in the dining room, his face turned towards the plastic chandelier, his blind white eyes rolling around. The first few years after the accident, I was panicked all the time. I woke up scared. I had the constant sense I should be doing something to help my brother. I sang to him, I read him science fiction novels. If I called Anup fatso or lazy, especially in a high-pitched voice, he'd grin from one side of his mouth, his face slumping like a stroke victim. And then if I started chanting, oink, oink, little fat pig, he'd begin a panting laugh, and drool started leaking down his chin. When I stopped the chanting, his face flattened, and it was like he was becoming lost in thought. I used to imagine my brother as a miner caught in a collapsed seam, and my teasing as me tapping to let him know he was not forgotten. By the time I was a teenager, I didn't want to take care of Anup anymore. I wanted to be left alone. I wouldn't read to him. I didn't like going into his room. My mother used to tell me all the time how selfish I was. Of course, this filled me with shame. I have a recurring dream where I'm at a party talking to someone. As we speak, I shit myself. Then I reach behind me and quietly, discreetly start shoving the shit back up my ass. When I saw Ziggy tumble off the sofa, look around, and then sink into herself, all these memories came so quickly that I was suddenly back in my youth. So the reason I had no particular desire to write about my daughter, right, is I want to protect her privacy, right? Like, it's not my right to be talking about her. Um, and the reason my wife asked me to write about it is because of all the crazy, evil stuff that RFK and the Trump administration is doing. And so she felt that was important. My wife is very political, right? So she'll go to marches, she'll do all these things. And she felt that it was important to put out voices of parents regarding this situation. And let me say that I do not speak on behalf of parents of children with disorders. Every child is different, every family is different. But that's what motivated me. I considered writing it as fiction, but I felt that that would give me too much. It would make my daughter vulnerable without making me equally vulnerable. Right? When you're writing it as nonfiction, you're saying, I wrote this thing. You can't deny the fact that you wrote it or that you meant it. And if my daughter was going to be made vulnerable, then it was my obligation to be vulnerable also. When you're writing and when you're revising, you're always thinking what looks good versus what sounds good. Right? And so your instincts get thrown off. If you're testing the quality of your prose by reading it out loud, certain things will sound better when they are read out loud and look worse, right, when you're purely visually. So my wife worries a lot. A few weeks after her daughter was born, she told me not to leave the stroller by the front door. A child molester might drive by and see it. And I have written, I really don't like hearing my wife's worries. And that sounds good, but when you read it, seeing the word really feels cheesy and sort of stupid. And so you're always balancing, is there any value on making yourself as the narrative voice look ridiculous? And then they either irritate me or I get worried too. And I fiddled with making it more of one sentence as a way to make the I narrator more of a twerp, right? But I haven't figured out, because you want to be a twerp, right? I want the character to be a twerp, but I don't want him too much of a twerp, right? So it's that right balance that you're seeking. Autism was, of course, what Christine and I feared. This was partially because Ziggy's pediatrician said Ziggy was fine physically, and partially because talk of autism is so much in the air. The word autism derives from the Greek for alone. The autistic person is trapped in his or her own world. Another way to think of autism is to think of autistic people as being computers with their own idiosyncratic operating systems. Often the systems crash, often the systems begin buffering and the screen freezes. This is, of course, a bloodless way to describe a child banging her head on the sidewalk till she knocks herself out. But bloodlessness is exactly what we seek. We want to hold the horror away. We wish we had longer arms. There is one therapy with strong evidence of ameliorating the effects of autism. Applied behavioral analysis derives from the work of B.F. Skinner and is a way of shaping the child through withholding. ABA at its roots argues that the autistic child can be trained the way a dog can. The girl is asked to say a phrase or complete a task by an expressionless adult. Depriving the child of something she wants, a doll or a piece of candy, causes the child to do what is wanted. ABA has been modified over the last several decades and, at least for very young children, turned into a form of play. The therapist tries to follow and encourage the child's own inclinations, constantly recording how the child reacts to her environment, and then encouraging certain interactions. For most people, ABA is only affordable if insurance covers it, and insurance will only cover if there is a diagnosis of autism from an expert. The waitlist in North Carolina for getting such a diagnosis was over a year. Children's brains are plastic. As they get older, this plasticity diminishes. The earlier the intervention, the more likely it is to be effective. To me, this meant the opposite was also true. Every day without Ziggy receiving help, she was getting more and more fixed in her disorder. Sometimes I'd go for walks in my suburban neighborhood and start crying at my daughter needing help and me not being able to provide it. I told my parents Ziggy might be autistic. Since my parents are not only not useful, but instead tend to make things worse, why did I do this? In the last 6-7 years of my writing, I've become more and more interested in 19th century writing. So I'm not as interested as I used to be with the Flaubert's idea that the author should be everywhere but unseen, like God. More and more I'm interested in the author asserting himself or herself. So this is why I've begun putting these things. It sort of relieves me as a writer. It seems sort of gives me space. Okay, so since my parents are not only not useful, but instead tend to make things worse, why did I do this? To us, she looks fine, my mother said. I spend all day with her, I yelled. Whenever you're wrong, you shout. My mother sounded delighted at this evidence of irrationality. I told them Ziggy would wake in the middle of the night and I'd watch her in the baby monitor as she sat silently for hours staring into the dark. I told them Ziggy didn't respond to her name. I said she didn't raise her arms to help when we were changing her top. As I was saying these things, I knew I wanted to cause them pain. Also, I understood I wanted them to think I was suffering like they had. I have a friend whose parents were in a concentration camp. He said his parents used to talk regularly about things they had seen, the man who slept on the cot above them and who, when he died, emptied his bowels on them. Peter became a crack addict, someone with sores on his face. One time he locked himself in his bathroom with a crack pipe and a bottle of vodka. Peter's wife called his father. His father came and sat on the floor outside the bathroom door. He said, "This is worse than anything in the camps." After this, Peter says he was able to go to rehab and become clean, that perhaps him becoming a crack addict might have been him wanting to suffer, so he would no longer be someone with a happy life, someone apart from his parents. I recognized my impulses and their power diminished. I think a lot of what was going on was that I wanted to form some understanding of what my daughter's situation meant, and I was looking for this through my parents' responses. It was like how right after my brother's death, I kept wanting to tell people my brother is dead so they could tell me how I should feel. When Ziggy was 16 months old, she had 5 words: up, milk, push, help, go. One bright Saturday, when the trees seemed almost fluorescent, she lost them all. In the morning, she started walking in circles around a small round table. I'd periodically pull her away from the table, but then she'd go back to it. At some point, she began walking on her toes. When she started the circles, she could speak. By late morning, she had no words. My wife was in the kitchen a few feet from me, but I felt all alone. I picked Ziggy up and held her against me. All afternoon and evening, I held her tight. "I'm so proud of you," I crooned. I wanted her to know that I would always be with her, neither ahead of her nor behind. I said this and thought this, but of course knew that what is true one day is not necessarily true a month later. This image, the trees are almost fluorescent. It's fine, but I've seen this image before. And so whenever you put in an image that you've seen before, you're basically signaling you're not a good writer. Right? And so I need to remember to take it out. But usually by the time you're about to submit a story or an essay, you're so exhausted that you don't really care. Right? So I once wrote a story, right? I always send my stories to 2 friends to get their opinions. And almost always they agree and tell me something is good or bad, usually bad. Only one time did they ever disagree. And one person said, "This is not good." And the other person said, "This is not good, but there's a lot of sex. You should be able to sell it to someone." And again, part of, you have to accept the fact that not every story you write is going to be the best story you've ever written, right? And part of being a working writer is you write this thing, you publish it, you get your money, and you move on to the next thing. And having that attitude lowers the stakes so that you don't get trapped. I'm not writing the story. I'm writing a story, man. you know? I don't remember my own stories. If you remember them, good for you. Uh, um, Something I tell my students often is that you should be aware that your characters have a history and they remember their history, right? These are not events of first impression on them. Nothing is an event of first impression. So the character says, I said this and thought this, but of course knew what's true one today is not necessarily true a month later. I love you, I love you. Yeah, right. And in 3 months, you're beginning to think this person is quite annoying. That's life. One evening, I ordered food from Uber Eats, and the black woman who delivered it had with her her teenage daughter, who was wearing pajamas and who seemed to have something wrong with her. Will my daughter not be able to be left alone? Another time, I talked to a colleague whose autistic son had applied to bag groceries and been turned down. Still another time, I took Ziggy to a playground in the afternoon, and there was a 5 or 6-year-old boy walking around in just a diaper. Will Ziggy refuse to wear clothes? I wondered. I saw the boy in his diaper and feared the special violence the world metes out on women. While about a third of women are sexually assaulted, about 80% of women who are developmentally disabled experience this. What sort of person rapes a woman who has a low IQ? Probably the same sort of smiling man who rapes a woman who has had too much to drink. Christine ran all the time now. She heard a noise in one part of the house and she darted towards it. She had a hard time sitting and eating. She'd make something and put it on the kitchen counter, take a bite, walk away, take another bite. By then the food was cold. She'd throw it away. Our worries cast us on separate islands. Again, an image I've seen before, so I need to get rid of it. Our worries cast us on separate islands. At night, we sat beside each other in bed in the dark, watching TV on our laptops. Sometimes we made an effort. Christine laid herself across my chest. We talked about old times. Do you remember when the man in Cairo held our hands and walked us across the road? Do you remember the room in Brooklyn that was so small it was easier to walk over the bed than around it? Old joys were the only joys. I work at Duke University and we have a clinic devoted to autism. I was able to arrange a call with a doctor there. Through sheer luck, someone had just canceled their diagnosis appointment. The clinic is behind and above a mini mall, which has a Dunkin' Donuts and a pizza shop in the parking garage. I could smell oil and dough. I was wearing a jacket and trousers, and Christine had on a skirt and stockings. I remember that when my brother was in the hospital, my parents used to dress formally so people might treat us better. I immediately disliked the doctor. She had brown hair and seemed stocky and mean. We were in a small room and there were transparent plastic boxes of toys on the floor. The boxes had numbers on them. She said she would go to another room and watch through a one-way mirror. We were to get Ziggy to engage with toys from one box. Then at some point, a sound would play and we should have Ziggy start another box. I thought, who are you to judge my daughter? I felt what the doctor should do was hug Ziggy and tell her she was wonderful. Christine and I got on the floor to show Ziggy a ball, a set of boxes, a truck. She crawled into a corner and stared at the wall. I lifted her by her underarms and brought her to the center of the room. The note sounded. We started another box. Again, Ziggy went into a corner. She crawled underneath a chair. It was like a nightmare of being in college and taking an exam for a class you didn't know you had signed up for. After around 2 hours, the doctors came back in. She sat in a chair by the door. We sat catty-corner to her. She explained she was going to write up a report, but that she could tell us what she thought she would write. I thought she was going to say Ziggy was fine. The doctor said Ziggy was autistic, that she would likely label Ziggy level 3 in terms of her diagnosis, which is the most severe form of autism. The doctor said that while there were some autistic people who can go out into the world and it is hard to tell they're on the autism spectrum, we should not expect this in our case. Christine does not remember the doctor saying this. How do you feel? She asked Christine. Christine started crying. I looked at her holding a tissue to her eyes. I thought, I've got to get the hell out of here. I thought, I've got to leave Christine and Ziggy and forget them. When the doctor asked what I was feeling, I knew I couldn't say what I was actually feeling. I don't believe you, I said. I'm almost out of time, 36 seconds. So, look, I'll leave it there, but one of the problems that I'm having with this story is sort of the structure of it. Because the way that I like to write things is that you cannot look away from the essay, right? It grabs you, it almost has a plot. I have a plot until, as I'm trying to get the diagnosis and find out what to do about it, right? Once that is done, then you're not now in a situation where things just open out, and you're basically waiting to see how much the therapy has an effect, and then beginning to realize it doesn't have an effect. And so the narrative, the thing that I'm seeking, which is propulsion, is gone. So I'm trying to figure out a structure to deal with it. And this is where I've been stuck for the last couple of days, trying out different solutions. There are ways to solve these things, right? Like, it's not hard. It's not hard to fake a solution. But before you fake a solution, it's useful to try to find an actual solution, right? So, anyway, I'm very, very glad to read this to you, and hopefully this article actually finishes. Thank you very much. I want to introduce my wonderful colleague, please. And this is Liz, whom I love very much, and whose last name I've forgotten.
It's Johnson. Thank you so much for that. Thank you also to Leah, Adam, and Travis, and who is doing a really great job, right? Just great job, Travis. And also, of course, to the entire conference staff for building this wonderful, beautiful space for us. Thanks also to my co-teacher, the Phoebos, and to our cohort, and of course also to the entire Sewanee Swim Club. You don't get to know what that is, it's okay, it's a secret. When I arrived here last week, or 100 years ago, maybe it was, I'm not sure, my cup was feeling, I think, really empty. And right now it's feeling so full. So thank you for that. So tonight I'm going to be reading from my new book. Don't ask me what the title is because I don't fucking know. I'm at the point in the writing of it where I want to throw the whole thing into the garbage, especially this week. And I guess the only thing that I've learned from writing previous books is that I recognize that this is in fact part of the process, and actually it means it's almost done. So, good. Thanks. So this book is about how we respond to environmental loss. And this particular chapter I'll be reading from is about the San Marcos Springs, which are in San Marcos, Texas, at the base of the Balcones Escarpment. So early in the history of San Marcos, the San Marcos River was dammed just below the springs, and it was turned into an artificial lake called Spring Lake, which then in the 1950s became a theme park called Aquarina, which included such attractions as an underwater theater where mermaids emerged out of enormous plaster clams, and Ralph, I kid you not, the swimming pig. That park shut down a really long time ago, but not before doing really a ton of environmental harm. And in truth, the park was just one example in a longer history of all kinds of environmental harm at these springs. The thing at this park in particular is that there's a species of wild rice called Texas wild rice. And the only place in the world this rice grows is in the upper 3 miles of the San Marcos River, just downstream from the springs. A survey of the wild rice in 1967 found only one plant in the lake, another in the upper part of the river, and only a few in the river's lower reaches. I forgot to set my timer, sorry. So this particular portion of the chapter, the name for a plant or a species that lives only in one place is called an endemic species. So this particular portion of the chapter, I'm volunteering on a habitat conservation workday with a crew that's been working to restore this river for over a decade. That workday happened in the context of a years-long drought in Texas. At a moment, it was becoming clear that the springs are also endangered because people are taking too much water out of the aquifer that feeds the springs. I guess the other thing that you need to know is that, as I said, the San Marcos Springs feed into the San Marcos River, which feed into the Guadalupe River, which travels all the way to the Matagorda Bay at the Gulf of Mexico. The Guadalupe River, above where the springs emerge, up on the Edwards Plateau, is where, that's the same river that flooded in Texas a couple of weeks ago. So the last thing that I want to offer before I begin is this quote from Tennessee Williams, which is actually in the prologue of the book, but I'm going to offer it here as an epigraph for this short excerpt. It goes, "Time is short, and it doesn't return again," he says. "It is slipping away while I write this and while you read it, and the monosyllable of the clock is loss, 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 unless you devote your heart to its opposition." I park in a lot near the river's hardened edge and cross the bridge. I see a swimmer snorkeling in the clear water of the current, moving so swiftly he is stationary, swimming vigorously and yet staying completely still. All around him, in 10-foot wide swaths on each side of the river, grow long undulating strands of what I recognize to be Texas wild rice, a species that is endemic to these springs, which means it grows here in this uppermost 3-mile stretch of this river and nowhere else on earth. I see a work truck parked along the riverbank and realize this must be my crew. The volunteers are already moving to get the utility sleds down the riverbank and into the water. One of the crew breaks off to greet me. This is Chris Riggins, a conservation biologist with the Meadows Center for Water and Environment here at Texas State University. He works with their ecological, sorry, by the way, this is the first time I've ever read this, so just bear with me while I flub this a little bit. Thanks. It's gonna go in the trash after this, like I said. He works with their ecological research group on projects related to habitat restoration and species conservation. Chris wipes his hands on his pants before reaching it out to me. I've worn river sandals today, and he gently lets me know that this was the wrong thing to do. He leads me over to choose a pair of scuba booties out of a pile in a plastic bin. They're disgusting. They've been worn by a lot of people. I dump my sandals and keys on the grass and slide down the riverbank, step onto the sand, then into the water, and sink in silt up over my ankles. In some places, I sink up to my knees. Once all of us are knee-deep in silt and hip-deep in the water, we choose our way down the edge of the river toward a bend where we'll be working today to remove invasive plants. Each time I take a step, my foot slurps out of the liquid ground. Clouds of silt spread through the water as I try desperately not to fall down, not to step on the delicate endangered plants. When we reach today's work zone, a group of volunteers is already here, bent over with their arms in the water. One is kneeling, submerged up to her chest. She pulls up a clump of plants and shows me the features. Today, we're looking for water sprite, an invasive aquatic fern that can grow fully submerged in the water, just floating on the water, or even on the riverbank, as long as it doesn't get too much sun. It can reproduce by runner and fragment and spore. It's spreading so quickly that it's killing a lot of the rice, she explains. She pulls the sled over so it floats between us. We lift the sprites out of the water and chuck them in. The San Marcos Springs in this upper part of the San Marcos River flow right through the campus of Texas State University, and many of the volunteers are students. One volunteer has been working in the river the entire time she's been a student here. She's a senior now and plans to pursue environmental law after graduation. Another is majoring in biology and plans to go to graduate school for environmental science. One's a psychology major. She tells me this work is meditation. It's as good as therapy, she says. There is indeed something meditative about this work. The sun is warm on my head and shoulders. The cool water laps around my hips. Birds swoop from the trees on one side of the river over to the other, undisturbed by the stream of quiet conversation between the 10 or so volunteers, heads bowed as if in prayer. I focus my eyes on the identifying features of the sprite and direct my hands in gentle pursuit. When the floating sled is full and beginning to sink, the volunteers walk it back through the riverbed and drag it up the bank. It takes 4 people to haul it up to the truck, the bed of which is lined with tarps. Volunteers dump the plant material in, sled after sled. When the truck bed is full, they drive it off to the dump site where the material is dried and burned. Each time the volunteers head off toward the truck with another full sled, I move toward a more empty one and begin pulling up the sprite. I stand to stretch my back, right now, which is barking after a morning of hunching over like a dog. A group of children on inner tubes floats around the bend up the river from us, some kind of day camp hosted by the university. The volunteers wave and the children wave back. An adult chaperone in the floating group asks what we're up to. The volunteer who is kneeling in the water tells them that we are taking care of the river by pulling out the plants that hog all the room. The children consider this in silence as they float past. Some recline on their tubes, their legs draped over the inflated slides. Bless you. Others hang with their arms over the edge, letting their bodies and legs trail behind. All of them watch us working, our legs and hands and arms in the river. Before losing sight of us around the next bend, one hollers, "Thank you for helping the environment." As important as it is, recreation in this river presents a major challenge to species recovery. Texas wild rice is legally protected as an endangered species, but it happens to grow in the shallow waters of a cool river in a hot and arid place, where it is often trampled as people get in and out of the river. City leaders have tried to address this by creating specific points for recreation access, concrete stairs and risers where people can enter the water and leave it, and the recovery team doesn't plant wild rice near these places. Signs along the river bank mark where the wild rice grows. One I saw as I approached the river said, "Go around, protected wild rice." For the most part, Chris and his team see a lot of support from the immediate community, but there are exceptions too, such as people who feel somehow inconvenienced by the recovery efforts, or that protections for wild rice means a reduction of their own freedoms, as if protection is a zero-sum game. One volunteer tells me about a day that they were planting and a swimmer yelled at her for clouding up the water. How sometimes people trying to access the river will be mad the work crew is in the way. People don't necessarily realize that measures like these, meant to protect and restore these endangered species, are the only reason there is still a river here at all. Another volunteer admits it's hard to know how to balance the needs of the river with the needs of the community. Summers are hot in Texas and getting increasingly so. People come here to swim or wade or float or fish, and we call this recreation, which perhaps implies something non-essential. But for many people, these activities are the expression of their connection with the river. It's their entire relationship with it. And the deeper the connection to the river, the greater the chances the river is something people will want to protect. I move over to where Chris is working in a cloud of silt. He expresses a little regret that I'm here when the water is all cloudy like this. Normally, it is crystal clear and I would be able to see the many different kinds of plants, the diversity of colors, maybe even some of the fish. He directs my attention to the other side of the river where a plant called Ludwigia, what a name, glows red under the bright sun. The endangered fountain darter makes its habitat here underneath these bright red leaves. All the work they've been doing to restore the Texas wild rice has brought the Ludwigia back too, and the endangered fountain darter are returning along with it. One of the volunteers announces that the truck is nearly full again. They decide we've done enough for today, so we choose our way back up river, trying not to step on any plants. though the stilt makes it hard to see. Eventually, the ground becomes more solid, and we pull all the sleds up onto the riverbank, then hoist them into the truck, building a pile of wet plants. I return the scuba booties to the bin and follow the other volunteers over to another part of the river near the pedestrian bridge. A ladder allows us to plunge into the water to rinse off the mud and sludge and sweat. Somehow the water feels colder here, closer to the spring head. Fresher, more alive, more invigorating. As Chris and Tom dry off along the river's edge, they invite me to come over to the office after lunch. Oh, Tom is the director. I cut out that part, sorry. He made a ghost appearance. So they can show me the San Marcos Springs. I cross the bridge, heading back to the parking lot, and see the snorkeler from this morning still swimming in the river for what must be hours now. I marvel at him for a moment. So much effort to stay in exactly the same place. In a room on the ground floor of the former Spring Lake Hotel overlooking the San Marcos Springs, I am standing behind Chris at his computer, where he shows me a series of aerial photos of the upper San Marcos River. In the earliest photo, the riverbed is choked with hydrilla, which is one of the most aggressive invasive aquatic plants in the country. Decades ago, an aquaculture farm along the river grew hydrilla as an aquarium plant, and in the river it found steady water temperatures and unprecedented water clarity, which allowed the plant to flourish and spread, stifling the native vegetation. Chris and his team worked for months on that small stretch of the river to remove the hydrilla. In a second photo, the river is open and clear. In the third, they have planted wild rice, situating the plants in a way that allows them to expand. In a fourth photo, this is exactly what has happened. The plants grow and blend into one another in the blue-green river bend. In the last photo, the long strands of rice sway in the current along the sides of the river, freckled with clumps of the red Ludwigia. These open sections here, Chris says, pointing to where clear water flows down the center of the river, that's habitat. He explains that gray red horse, a native carp-looking fish, utilizes the bottom substrate and lives in those open areas, hiding for protection in the wild rice. And there, where plants are growing, there are thousands of fountain darters all through that area. The plants are growing, expanding on their own to merge, diversify, and fill in the space. Fish and insects and other plants are beginning to arrive and finding here what they need to survive. I imagine that feels motivating, I say. Seeing that once the ecosystem crosses a certain threshold, it starts to manage on its own. Chris explains that part of this is just how their top-down restoration plan works. They call it natural expansion. All the plants can fragment and grow on their own, so we just climb into these areas and put in plants, and then they spread downstream. The more they repeat this and the further along they get, the more the plants themselves are able to help in the process of their own restoration. Their work also naturally expands in a different way. The more work they do on the river, the more people want to be involved in the work they do. Community members volunteer on work days. Nonprofits raise money to support their research and conservation work. I already do litter removal on the weekends, Chris tells me. I don't really have to do more, but instead of just doing it on my own on a Sunday, I'll go to the groups on Monday morning just to be part of the community effort. The more people we are able to get involved, the more likely it is there will be policy change. People who have been involved will vote to fund those kinds of programs. Sometimes the people who get involved are really powerful, and they are able to push for change. But more than this, the act of working in the river brings the river into people's sphere of consideration, helps them build a relationship to it that is active and reciprocal. People who volunteer on environmental projects are more likely to consider the environmental impact of their actions and make small changes to lessen that impact, or to make choices that have environmental benefits. Even something like volunteering to clean up litter from a park helps to keep that litter out of the river. And keeping litter out of the river helps the river to thrive. And a thriving river, in turn, takes care of the community. But cleaning litter isn't the only way people can help. There are numerous projects where people can get involved at community levels, and the results are noticeable, Chris says. I think a lot of people don't realize that volunteering is a way to meet people, to have fun, and to make a positive impact on your environment and community. He doesn't say this, but I know from my own experience that working to repair a harm, especially an environmental one, has psychological benefits as well. Studies have shown that opportunities to nurture the environment reduces feelings of helplessness, isolation, depression, and stress. Participating in this work in a collective way helps people feel more connected to each other and to the world we are working to improve, even perhaps to a future we will not ourselves live to see. Speaking only for myself, even after only one day in the river, I feel less helpless, less alone. At the end of our conversation, Chris walks me outside and we lean on the metal railings overlooking the springs. He tells me about the boats that clean invasive plants off the surface of the lake like giant lawnmowers, about the 100-mile running and biking trail in development now that will connect this spring to other springs along the escarpment and will pass right by the springs. He mentions that the university has recently signed a letter of agreement with the Miak and Garza tribe of the Coahuiltecan people to explore the possibility of building a multi-purpose center on university property that would serve as a cultural and educational hub, connecting shared parkland, community gardens, and protected waterways as an example of water and land conservation and stewardship. The plan is to locate that right here along the side of the lake, which is a move toward another kind of restoration. It's their land. It's their river, he explains. He tells me about an archaeological site located under the surface of the lake where artifacts offer evidence that the springs have been continuously occupied for at least 13,000 years, beginning during Clovis times and perhaps even 1,000 years before that, making it perhaps the oldest continuously occupied place in North America. Before Anglo settlers arrived here and built a dam that sent the springs under the surface of an artificial lake, the springs were spectacular fountains, reaching 10 to 15 feet into the air, and they were one of the many springs all along the fault line of the Balcones Escarpment. Far west of here, where the escarpment meets the Rio Grande, a 4,000-year-old painting on a cliff wall provides a map of all of these springs, many of which have now been submerged by dams or have been sucked dry by demands on the aquifer. In this cliffside map, the San Marcos Springs are part of a sacred geography, the beginning and end of pilgrimage, the doorway to this universe from another, the site of human creation. I read recently that the Ogallala Aquifer is running dry. It is one of the largest aquifers in the world, a shallow water table underlying a portion of 8 states. It supplies water for crop irrigation and livestock production, as well as drinking water for cities and rural communities, all of which draw on the aquifer faster than it is able to replenish. Even in a wet year, the aquifer recharges only half an inch through rainwater that collects on the ground in shallow pools and lakes. In drought years, there is not even this. The Ogallala is not the only aquifer that is in trouble. A recent survey of 1,700 of the world's aquifers found that water levels are dropping in more than 2/3. These declines are especially pronounced in arid climates with extensive crop agriculture. In coastal areas where populations are growing faster than inland areas, depleted aquifers risk saltwater intrusion and contaminated water supplies, especially as sea levels rise. Water tables, rivers, drainage basins, all are part of a global hydrological system that includes not only subterranean water and aquifers, but also surface water in streams and lakes, as well as water that flows through atmospheric rivers, that is stored in glaciers and slowly released, that is held in soil and plants and in agricultural crops like fruit and vegetables. Water is stored especially in meat. Around the world, human activities are changing these systems. Forests and wetlands become agricultural land becomes arid desert, lake levels drop and drop, while the sea level is only going up. Decades of collective mismanagement have damaged our freshwater and land ecosystems, write the authors of a recent report from the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. By 2071, they predict, freshwater resources will not meet demand. Water scarcity exacerbated by these changes has already put food systems at risk, contributing to the spread of disease, increasing conflict within and across nations, and leading to increased migration. One cause of the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, was a years-long drought leading to major agricultural failure and the mass migration of farming families from rural communities to urban centers. the linked global crises of droughts, floods, and decreasing availability of potable water, all exacerbated by climate change, are some of the major factors driving migration from South and Central America to the southern border of the United States. A collective problem, like water scarcity, can be solved only by collective actions and decisions at every level. From intergovernmental agencies to local governments, from industrial manufacturers to individual communities. Solutions might require a collective effort to waste less water and less food, to eat and waste less meat. But more than this, it also demands a collective commitment to restore and protect all the ways that water moves, through forests, wetlands, prairies, and rivers, through every place, every person, and every living being. After dinner, I bring my family to the riverside. It is a hot night at the peak of summer. A band is playing in the park. Couples sit on the concrete stairs leading into the cool water of the river. People wear hats and sunglasses, wave themselves with paper fans. A woman wades in at the water's edge, holding the hem of her dress up around her knees. Children submerge, splash each other upstream. A dog pulls his owner into the water to get a drink. My family humors me, as they have learned to do, but they're not sure why we're here. It's pleasant enough, like any other river. I'm not ready to leave quite yet. I can't explain why, really. So I ask them all to sit down with me on the concrete steps. I show them the bend upstream where we were working earlier this morning. The silt has settled and the water has cleared. I point out the long strands of wild rice, the red Ludwigia. While we worked, I asked Chris about why he is here, about why he does this work. Because the river deserves to exist, he told me. Sitting here near the springheads, I am reminded of recent legal victories for rivers. In 2017, the Maori tribe of Wanganui in New Zealand won a 140-year legal battle when the government recognized the Wanganui River as their kin by law. The same year, India granted the Ganges and Yamuna rivers the same legal rights as people, meaning that any harm to the river, such as overexploitation or pollution, will come with the same penalties as harming a person. Years later, Bangladesh became the first country to grant the same legal status as humans to all its rivers. In May 2019, the Yurok tribe inscribed rights for the Klamath River into tribal law, the first law of its kind in North America, which protects the rights of the river to exist, flourish, and naturally evolve. I'm trying to imagine what rights like that would look like for this river. But all I can think about is the snorkeler swimming upstream this morning, of wild rice seeds floating downstream to propagate. I think of fountain darters returning, of tiny beetles swimming through underground caves, of the gray-red horse moving between the open spaces between the riverbanks. I think of the confluence miles away from where this river joins with another, where prawns swim upstream over 7 concrete dams to breed in a murky eddy before swimming back hundreds of miles to the shallow brackish bay, where the world's last flock of wild whooping cranes hunt for the blue crabs at the edge of a rising sea. Thank you. Chinga la migra.